By popular demand, we'll call the meeting to order. We'll still start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
We have to make a motion to approve the agenda if we do this.
Well, we don't have a quorum.
We're just
so
having an informational meeting. We don't even need to go through these.
Yeah, we don't even have to do.
Because we don't have enough to approve the agenda.
Yeah.
So
We
I still want to do.
we can do the
Want to do
Pledge
Pledge
of
of
Allegiance.
Allegiance?
I was hoping you weren't going to be recorded saying you don't want to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
No.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm glad you didn't take a knee.
Okay. Well, so do you want to call roll or no?
I would say no.
All right. So we don't have any minutes to approve, and we don't have a quorum, so we won't approve any minutes. Correspondence / board reports. Anything urgent from the Board of Trustees that we need to know that can't wait till next week? Okay. Any urgent correspondence? Okay. Approval of the agenda. Well, we won't approve the agenda. Public comment. We still have public comment. If there's anyone who would like to address the commission on any item that's not on tonight's agenda, they're invited to do so at this time. We just ask you to give us your name and address for the minutes and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Public comment is open at 6:36. And seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that back up. So new business, we have the review of the diagnostic report for the zoning ordinance. So do you have anything introductory you want to say?
Nope.
Okay, so I will turn it over to our consultants. Welcome.
So as a reminder, my name is Mike Dean. Patrick had another meeting tonight, so he was able to come tonight. We have Hunter Whitehall with us. Moving forward, Hunter's going to be working a lot on updating the ordinance for you guys, so I thought it was important to bring him along, you know, and sort of introduce him to you guys, and so you can kind of see, you know, some of your concerns as we move forward. So you guys should have a copy of the diagnostic review. So after our introduction meeting, we had an opportunity to go through the zoning ordinance, the notes that Peter passed on, and some of the other ordinances of the township, and you know, we put our thoughts together in this review. So one of the first things that we noted going forward is that when your updated zoning ordinance is complete, it's going to have hyperlinks and cross references. You know, as part of our proposal, I think that's, you know, one of the key selling points to having an updated zoning ordinance. It's just like being on the web. You can click on a reference and it'll take you to that section of the ordinance, or even if it's,
Just within the document, not jumping.
So it depends, right? If it's a reference to a state law, or if it's a reference to a township law, we can have those links in there. What we try and do is find permanent locations for links, right? Mm-hmm. So from the state laws, there's certain the state maintains their own site, right? So we can put links in that we feel confident will remain valid. And usually when they update, the old links stay active, and they'll tell you where to go for the new links. Within the township, we're going to be giving you a guide at the end on how to update the ordinance, so you can easily update those links to other township references. You know, if you want to reference the county, you can still go through that process. It's a little bit, you don't have as much control, right? Mm-hmm. So typically what we'll do is we'll put references, and we can have that discussion if you want us to link those or not. But that's going to be an important part of this, right? The next thing we noted is graphics. We put some examples of some of the graphics that we'll be using to update. Obviously, some of the numbers on these graphics aren't going to match what is in your ordinance, but these will be updated for that. And then we talk about passive versus active language. So a lot of that is clarifying and simplifying the language so everyone can understand what it's trying to say to the extent possible, right? Because at some point the lawyers are going to say, let's not do that. Let's keep it very technical. And that's why we're going to be working with the township attorney on this also. So one of the things that we are recommending is a reorganization of the sections of the zoning ordinance. You know, right now there's similar information in different sections of the ordinance, And so going through this reorganization, it's going to help put everything in order that makes sense. So the organization is going to start with the title and purpose and scope. Again, right, more attorney language. Definitions, which we'll talk about a bit in a minute. The zoning districts and map. Schedules and regulations. Then we will have the supplemental zoning district standards. Standards applicable to specific uses, general provisions, environmental performance standards, parking, loading, and access, landscape screening, signs, nonconformities, administrative organization, and then the procedures. Once, the next step that we're going to go through is create an annotated outline. So essentially what that's going to be is we're going to create our rough outline, reorganizing the ordinance as it is, and show you where those new sections will be lined up under this new format. So you can get a better understanding, a better feel of how the flow is going to work out. So the next thing we identified here is definitions. You know, we did a review of your current definitions and made some notes on things that we are going to recommend for updates. A number of these relate to signs, and so we're going to talk about more about the sign ordinance in a bit as we go through. But again, you know, the goal is to make this clear and easy to understand. So we're also going to be adding graphics to a number of these definitions to help create that reference so that people can easily understand what's going on. I don't know if you've had a chance to read through what we've had so far, but if you have any questions, please, you know, interrupt me and go. You know, looking through the definitions, there wasn't anything that jumped out as like, wow, I can't believe you have that in there. But you know, there's a bunch of little minor things, you know, especially as best practices change and whatnot, and we've noted those in there. You know, we created a list of what we thought, based on your existing definitions, what graphics are necessary, and again, these are, you know, definitions are more visual in nature. Like what's an alley? Well, it's a lot easier to show what that is in a graphic form than just reading it in words. One of the things that we said we would create is a permitted use table. And so what we did to show you just in rough draft form what that's going to look like, put together your existing uses under breaking it up both into non-residential uses and residential uses. And that kind of gives you a visual of, you know, where you allow different uses, you know, and so as we move forward, these are going to change, right? Because I think, you know, not all these uses, some uses are limited to certain sections that may not need to be as limited as they currently are, and some will be restricted, and some are going to be recommended to remove. One of the things that off the top of my head is the marijuana club, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. But the intent of this is that, you know, if someone wants to come into the township and they want to know if they can, you know, have a greenhouse, well, where can I go? And quickly turn to the special land use, or to the use chart, see greenhouses. These will all be hyperlinked to those sections in the ordinance, so you can click right on there and that will take you to that section.
Just a comment on that is bringing the header down to the next page,
Yeah.
because I found myself jumping
Sure.
back and forth.
Yeah, you know, part of it was the format of putting it within the diagnostic review as opposed to keeping it in the Excel form we have right now.
Okay.
But definitely that will be addressed. Next, we move on to the zoning district summaries. And, you know, again, we put together the rough draft to give you an example of what they're going to be looking like as we move forward. One of the things that will change is that the colors, you know, right now they're all this beige, orangish color. They're going to be matching your zoning district colors on your zoning map. But again, right, for this process, we just wanted to show you this is what it's essentially going to look like. So you'll have your statement of purpose for the zoning district, your principal permitted uses, special land uses. When there are additional standards for that use, those will be hyperlinked within the document. That'll take you there. We also have, in sort of the middle, bottom of the page, the dimension regulations for the zoning district. And those will be repeated again in your schedule of regulations. But again, the goal is to have everything together where they make sense. So by having the district summaries, you have all of your agricultural information on one page-ish. I think some of them probably have 2 pages, but generally, right, on one page. But then if you just want to know what the schedule regulations for all zoning districts are, there's going to be a page for that too. And you have a chart that's easy to follow. You know, you already have your 2 scheduled regulations. They're kind of split up and apart from each other, but our goal is to essentially have them in the same chapter.
Can we hyperlink from the table down?
Yes. Yep. And again, we're going to have, you know, in the final document, we'll also have the supplemental document that will tell you how to update it. So as you add or remove and those links need to be edited, you can easily do that. We mentioned the schedule of regulations table. Form-based codes. We are working on the master plan for Mount Pleasant right now. And so as part of that, we're going to be looking at the possibility of incorporating form-based codes into your zoning ordinance along Remus, Bluegrass, and Pigger to sort of implement or complement what the city's been doing. So we're looking for that partnership and synergy within our own department to help you guys out with that. As mentioned, as you remember, when we talked about the outline, you know, we talked about having the general development regulations all together for specific uses. So we went through and identified what you currently have in there, and we will be reviewing them again as we move forward. Some notes some things that I noticed, you have some very extensive footnotes for your adult regulated uses that are not generally found in other zoning ordinances. So I am going to assume that that's something that the attorney wanted you guys to include in your ordinance. And if it's something that we will also include, not quite sure what format that's going to take in, but we will make sure that's included in there. When we got to your marijuana clubs, I'm going to assume that that was done as a way to sort of regulate what the state wasn't regulating when the caregiver law came out. You know, now with the Facilities Licensing Act and now with the recreational, I think that there's an opportunity to, one, revisit your regulations for caregiver and then provide the township an opportunity to discuss medical facilities and recreation. Since we're updating the ordinance now is the perfect time to address that. I'm sure you guys know with the recreational, unlike the medical marijuana, this is an opt-out ordinance. So if you do nothing, it's allowed. With the medical marijuana, if you do nothing, it's not allowed. So essentially, all communities have to make a decision now that before they didn't have to. From the state standpoint, you probably have, I think it's going to be until December of 2019 to make that decision. But obviously, the sooner discussion that's had, the better, so we can incorporate that into the ordinance.
Right.
And we have to recommend that up, right? So,
Currently, township staff is working on an ordinance.
Okay.
I think it's planned to be brought to the Board of Trustees for consideration.
Well, we should be reviewing it before then, what do you think?
Well, it's not a zoning ordinance.
So is the ordinance you're working on to allow it and license it?
No, it'd be an opt-out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that would make sense then, right? Because if
okay.
the board chooses not to do it, there's no.
If they choose to do it, then yeah, it'll start here.
We'll just have to make sure we communicate it.
Sure. And you know, if that's the direction you go, you know, was it MTA or MML put out their draft for updating your ordinance? It's like 3 lines, right? So it's
Okay.
not a big
Easy
deal,
peasy.
right?
Go through the same thing with the sidewalk ordinance, you know, they came up with something or the recommendation from there and we never got to see it.
Yeah.
Yet the board approved it right away, and I know there's things that I would have questioned on that, seeing their sidewalk recommendations. I just hate anything going forward because they're
So also from your existing uses, your wind energy ordinance, our recommendation is that we review it and update it. There's new best management practices, new requirements that the energy companies have been acceptable to that help protect the township. Little things from types of lights that are on the top of the tower. Now you can require them to be radio or radar controlled so that they only blink if a plane is within X amount of feet, so they're not on all the time. The other things that we strongly recommend is having decommissioning plans and bonding associated with it, so that if they do become obsolete and no longer operable, you have a mechanism to remove them if necessary. And then, obviously, we're going to recommend the same thing for solar energy. We have two good models that I think would be appropriate for Union, and I think that's one of the first things we're going to start working with you guys on as this moves forward. So the next thing we have listed here is parking, loading, and access management. One of the things that we are recommending, and maybe appropriate a little bit of discussion now, is to change the parking to parking maximums. This is a trend that is starting to take over, that's picking up steam in the state. So essentially, if you look at how parking is generally done, it's based on the parking needs from the day after Thanksgiving till Christmas, right? So your parking requirements are 40 days, or however long that is. The other 320 days of the year, your parking lots are 75% empty. So communities are essentially requiring too much parking for the uses. By switching to parking maximums, one, you're allowing the businesses to essentially determine how much parking they need to put in. But we're not just going to leave it at that, right? Because we're going to identify what the maximums are. But there's going to be situations where someone wants to put in more than we say they need. So our recommendation is to incorporate low-impact development design into that excess parking. And so what that means is they would have to use things like permeable pavement, bioswales, and ways to manage the stormwater and keep it on site. So also using rain gardens and whatnot. Provides flexibility for the businesses, while at the same time provide some environmental protection to the township. You may also have an issue with a business not wanting to put in as much parking as you think they need. And so we also have a lane banking requirement in here. So if you have a new business that says, all right, we think we only need 3 parking spaces, you're like, oh, that's ridiculous. You need at least 15. They say, all right, well, we can show you where on our plan that we can meet that standard of 15. But we'll put it in when it's needed, not at the beginning. So one, it allows businesses to actually get established, and two, it provides protection to the township and saying, all right, you can do this, but when this trigger happens, that parking would need to be installed.
We've had a few projects that we've done that for, set aside parking, basically what we call it.
Other things that we noted were including regulations for winter considerations, right? So where are they going to put their snow when they're plowing? We'll have some bike parking standards, encourage cross-access agreements, work on access management to reduce curb cuts and connections between properties, and then include graphics where they are necessary to help, again, get that message across. So, do you have any questions about that philosophy for parking?
What are the maximum formula? What formula are those based on?
So they're going to be based on the the ITE parking generation. So that's the Institute of Traffic Engineers. They have their standards that that they have, and then we'll also look at what surrounding communities have and sort of give that a well-rounded approach to that.
I assume based on the way you described it, namely that parking tends to be based on what is assumed a business or a facility might need at its highest end in terms of like Christmas time. If it's less than that, what do they do when the demand exceeds? Are you assuming that these types of municipalities would have some sort of centralized, parking that's just general additional parking, or?
So again, right, other things that are in here are about cross-access and joint parking agreements. So, the other thing to consider is not just focusing solely on your individual parcel, what is the parking ability for the area that you're in. I know.
So like the dentist office in the Target parking lot, that type of thing where
Right.
you could be sharing spaces?
Definitely.
Mm.
Yep.
Alright.
And again, you will have the ability to review it during the site plan review. And, if you will, a lot of what we want to include in here are planning commission waivers, so that when you get a site plan, it doesn't have to go in front of the zoning board for every little change. You will have the ability to deal with it during site plan review, help reduce the number of meetings that an applicant has to go through. And, if you just take into, from a logical standpoint, the planning commission, when you're doing your site plan review, that's really when you should be able to work out a lot of these minor tweaks to a plan. And ordinances don't generally give that, ability in here. So having the ability for the planning commission to actually take the site into consideration as part of their review, is an important part of some of our recommendations here.
Okay. Well, we definitely love waivers at this planning commission, right?
Alright, so next up we have landscaping, right? So we're gonna be, looking at your requirements for landscaping. So that includes your screening between uses, your green belts, parking lot standards. One of the things we really want to try and encourage is using native planting materials and using green design whenever possible. And so providing those bonuses and encouragement will be part of this. We also recognize that the area as a whole has issue with stormwater management, and so being able to incorporate some of those techniques into your landscaping, improves the environmental quality of the area, improves the appearance of the site, and also helps with your economic viability too. So those are the principles of the updated ordinance that we're going to be working on for that. Another big section that we are going to be working on is signs. What was it, back in 2015, there was the Supreme Court case, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which really changed how every single community in the country regulates signs, right? So the big phrase that came out of that is content neutrality. And so regulations that regulate signs by what the sign says needs to be updated and changed, right? So you can regulate the appearance and to an extent the size, setbacks, and things like that. But once you start regulating the content of the sign, it becomes a little bit more dicey. So right now there's regulations in there for things like political signs, yard signs, etc. Our goal is to be able to classify those as non-commercial message and commercial message, on-premise, off-premise, and use these general terms that will cover the township, but still be able to address and regulate signage in a consistent manner that helps protect the character of the township. Other things we're going to be looking at are electronic message signs and those regulations. One of the things that's interesting, at least to me, right, from a planner, typically when you start working with lobbyists, they are 100%, I want this and that's it. The sign lobbies are understanding the community's hesitation to electronic messaging signs and how bright they can be, how flashy they can be, and how often those messages turn. They also recognize how much money they can make off of these signs. So they're much more willing to work with communities now, and they've put out their recommended standards that are really, you know, pretty reasonable. You know, things like having dimmer switches on electronic messaging signs so that they're brighter during the day, but then when night, when your ambient lighting changes, they don't need to be as bright because you can see them better in the dark. You know, having regulations for how fast or if the message changes. So those, and again, and how bright and how to measure the brightness. So those are regulations that we'll be updating as part of this review. We also mentioned having an environmental performance chapter. You know, we'll be looking at riparian buffers, wetland protections, the steep slopes and ridge lines, and woodlands and tree canopy, assuming that House Bill or Senate Bill 1188 doesn't pass out a lame duck. If you're not aware, there is currently a Senate bill out there that would remove local communities' ability to regulate woodlands and tree protection ordinances, where essentially you wouldn't be able to regulate the removal of trees in your community. And so it's questionable as to which direction that's going to go, but that's something we're going to keep our eyes on, and we'll update as necessary. That's something, again, that I've been mentioning is stormwater management. You know, that's an important part of the township, and we want to work with the public service department to help incorporate some of those best management practices into the zoning ordinance, so that you have a little bit stronger hammer for addressing those during site plan review. We will help with the lighting in the ordinance. We'll yeah, so your ordinance like talks about lighting, but doesn't really provide a lot of standards relating to lighting. So, especially relating to parking lot lighting, we'll develop some recommended minimums and maximums. and again, right, waivers will be an important part of this process, and we'll outline when waivers are appropriate and what the process for that is. Clear vision areas, this gets back to your access management. So that's looking at where you have your intersections and making sure that, well, there's a perfect graphic right there for what I'm trying to describe. When a car pulls up to an intersection, make sure they can see both ways and be able to clearly identify what those clear vision areas are. The next is accessory structures and uses. Again, right, we'll be looking at these to determine what the appropriate size requirements are for them based on zoning district. Some districts, you know, they'll be allowed to be larger than others, and you know, consider what forms what does the accessory building mean in this day and age, right? Because starting to see people proposing things such as shipping containers for accessory buildings, or you know, alternative ways to create greenhouses. And you know, we want to make sure that we're protecting the character of the township and still provide flexibility. So we'll be working with you on that, developing what the best action is for that. Fences and walls. You do have some regulations relating to that. We're going to be make some recommendations on expanding those standards, looking at the prohibited materials, exemptions and aesthetics, and when permits required. Another thing is dumpsters. Right? Currently, you don't have regulations for dumpsters, so we'll help identify appropriate screening for your dumpster facilities. We talked about alternative energy, with updating your wind energy and providing a solar energy ordinance for you to review. Those are really the two biggest movements going through the state right now, with communities updating their zoning ordinance to address those. And then we had a discussion on medical marijuana, recreational marijuana. Recreation vehicles, we're gonna help clarify when it's where the appropriate locations for the storage of recreational vehicles are. And then non-motorized transportation. So one of the things you talked about earlier was sidewalks. We'll look about incorporating those standards as appropriate into the zoning ordinance and through the site plan review process.
Differentiating sidewalks and pathways.
Yep. So our next section is administrative procedures and standards. So non-conforming uses in buildings. The Zoning Enabling Act allows communities to develop classifications of non-conforming uses. So what some communities do is they have like a Class A non-conforming use, and these would be residential uses in non-residential zoning districts, where if fire were to happen and their house were to burn down, they would have the ability to rebuild their house as if it were an approved use. So essentially what that does, it kind of lowers their insurance rates and clarifies and makes the process for building easier, and having to come from the zoning board and try and justify the need for rebuilding. Now another type of classification that some communities do is preferred class of non-conforming use. And whether or not this is appropriate for you is something that we can discuss as we move forward. But essentially, occasionally you're going to find non-conforming use that fits for their site, right? It could be an auto mechanic shop in a residentially zoned district, but it's on a main thoroughfare, and it's not really next to single-family homes. And that use has been there forever, and it's a good business, and they want to expand, but they can't because they're not conforming use. They could go through a process that's similar to a special land use if you were to approve another class of these uses, and would essentially make them a conforming use. So they'd be able to expand and repair their business as necessary. But one of the things that's nice about this is that you can go by use, location. You may have an existing auto repair shop in the middle of a neighborhood, for whatever reason, and that doesn't work. Nobody likes it, because of this the situation of it not being in an appropriate location. That's something that you wouldn't have to grant the non-conforming use or the preferred use standards to. But that's something we can show you some standards and have that discussion if that's something that you want to move forward with. Then we talked about the site plan review process. One of the things we want to do is make that process as clear as possible. We'll include flowcharts to help understand what the process is, when you have to go to site plan review, when it can be done administratively, and what the noticing requirements are for each step. I also mentioned zoning board of appeals.
Could I interrupt?
Yep.
So I was reading about this preliminary site plan review. I guess we've had an informal one that we've implemented over the years, but it hasn't been formalized, where we've occasionally had someone come before us and want a preliminary review. I guess I want to understand if we have this formal preliminary review step, it looks like mainly the thing that we would get would be more or less the footprint of the project. There's still going to be the second part where they come back with the full fleshed out design with the buildings and the elevations and the lighting and the screening and all that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so essentially the reason why you do that is the engineering, right, that's the expensive part of going through the site plan process. And businesses can be hesitant to put all that money up front without knowing that, where they want to put the building, the basics of the plan is going to be improvable. And so by having that formalized preliminary step, it offers that option for them to get, it's more than a conceptual plan,
Yeah.
right? So it's more than just you know, the footprint, but it doesn't have the engineering and it still allows for that stuff to be worked out as they go through their process.
So is there minimums that you would expect them to come with?
Yes. Yep, and, you know, we'll have a checklist as part of that, you know, outlines, and these are what's required for preliminary. And if someone wants to just come in and do the final with all their engineering done, there's nothing that's gonna prevent them from doing that. But at least has that formal process where they can come in and you know that you're gonna be getting enough information to make an informed decision, you know, on that preliminary review. So zoning board, really, that section is gonna be updated to match the zoning enabling act. You know, special land use, that's gonna tie into your site plan review. We've already discussed going over those specific uses, but the procedure for site plan, or for special land uses will be tied into that site plan review. Amendments, you know, what the process for amending the zoning ordinance. Public notices, again, you know, those sections are really just complying with the zoning enabling act. One thing we do recommend is for your enforcement violation penalties, consolidate those into one section. Again, right, since we're going to be hyperlinking, it'll be easy to reference that section. And then performance guarantees, you know, especially when we're talking about things like solar and wind energy, having the ability to enforce those performance guarantees, have, you know, the township have some sort of financial backing for decisions that are going to be made. It's important. You know, a lot of communities have been burned, you know, in the past, where especially like subdivisions would start and then they wouldn't be completed, and the roads weren't adopted by the road commission. Now who's going to maintain them? Who's going to, you know, who's going to plow them? And, you know, this will help address some of those situations. So that's our diagnostic review. You know, I think for next steps, you know, we want to create the annotated outline and then get started presenting you some chapters to look at. I think that the two of the most important that we should be starting on are the wind and solar energy. You know, and like I said, we have a model that we're in the process of adapting to union for review. But that's where we are in the process, and you know, I'm here to answer any questions you guys have.
I'll start with a question, I guess. I think this all looks great, by the way, and it looks very like it would be a very user-friendly document and very, very modern and so on. I guess a question I have is, what about the issue of whether we have the right zones and whether the right stuff is in them? Is that going to be part of this at some point, and are you going to give us some advice on that?
Yeah, so from the zoning districts themselves, the only question I really had was what your difference between your R4 and your R5 zoning districts are. Because they're essentially the same, except one requires a mobile home park and another allows lots. So there might be an opportunity to consolidate that a little bit. But the specific uses in and of themselves are going to be looked at as we go forward and identify, you know, what's the right zoning district for each use. That's why your use chart you have is your current uses, because that's going to change. You know, we're going to make recommendations that some of these uses aren't going to be appropriate for the district that they're in. We're going to recommend removing, you know, at least the marijuana club, and then we're probably going to add a couple of uses that should have specifically be listed with their standards.
And as we go through this on our future land use map, are we going to see how it affects how we have that set up?
Well, so you just went through your master plan process, right? And I know I read through it before. I don't remember it exactly off the top of my head. But I know some of the recommendations that we put in here were based off of the master plan.
Okay.
So I did go through the action plan and pull out all the zoning items that needed to be addressed. So updating, so the future land use map is sort of your guide for future development. You know, your zoning ordinance is the law, right? You know, if, you know, we can look at that again and see if the appropriate triggers have happened, where it makes sense to do rezoning now or not. Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head. You know, I know I looked at it, but nothing jumped out at me as like, oh, we need to change this today.
Okay. I would just say we keep it in the back of our minds.
Yep.
So that we don't have conflicting
Yep.
tools.
Sure.
So,
Definitely.
and I did like this layout. It's
Yeah.
easy to move around.
Yeah. It'll look even better when it's done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I liked all the consolidating of references too,
Yes.
just to make it more user-friendly.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so procedurally, I know tonight's a special meeting. Is the intent to do this, to have us meet with you at special meetings or at the planning commission meetings, or, you know, I think we intended to have about 5 meetings with you for the first draft of the ordinance. So sort of developing a section and then presenting it to you. I'm wondering if it may make sense for us to complete a section, get it to you guys, and then meet the following month, either at a special meeting or during the planning commission meeting, however, you know, is appropriate for you guys.
Well, it certainly seems like it would make sense for us to get the stuff and have a chance to look it over before you come all the way up here to
Right.
talk to us about it. I'm going to say, for just speaking for myself, that if the timing works out that we can do some of this at regular meetings, I think there's value in that, because we presumably are available at our regular meetings for the most part, whereas anytime we do a special meeting, we're having to kind of hunt and find. But if our agendas are full, then we'll end up doing special meetings.
So I think that's probably a great plan then, right? We'll plan on doing it on your regular meetings, and then, you know, if Peter sees that the agenda is getting too long, we can, you know, either hold off the next meeting or set up a special meeting as needed.
Would you throw a number out at the agenda, how much time you think you would need to go through it so that we?
Yeah, you know, as we submit sections, we can definitely, it's like, hey, we should probably take, you know,
Yeah.
3 days.
I know.
However long.
We're gonna need 45 minutes at least to
Right.
talk about, that's
Yeah,
what I
definitely we
think
can
would
do
be
that.
helpful.
I would just say as a note, 2 weeks before the planning commission meeting, we know exactly what is on our agenda, so.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, are there any sections that we would prefer them to start? I mean, you'd mentioned a couple with, you know, wind, solar, or that type of thing, or do we have a preference on a different section that we would rather have them address first?
So personally, I would like to do wind and solar first, because we have a really good handle on that. And this way, that gives a little bit more time to work on, you know, updating your specific ordinance. I think it would be beneficial for you guys, for us to have that extra time to really dive a little bit deeper into this as we make our recommendations.
Okay.
Where the wind and solar, I know, is solid.
Okay. It doesn't bother me either way, I just didn't know if anybody had a preference,
No.
so, okay.
So when will we expect something back?
It's a good question. So, when's your regular meetings?
Tuesdays, third Tuesdays.
Third Tuesday? We should be able to have the wind and solar to you probably the first week of January. And then, you know, we can move from there. And if I'm inspired, I might have it done next week. I don't wanna promise that, but
You say-
definitely the first week of January.
See, third Tuesday, is that what you said?
I would just let the board know that the January meeting is looking like it potentially could be a heavy meeting. So we may have to
Is that on the
schedule,
15th?
if that's the third Tuesday.
That would be January 1st is a Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, we'll actually be adopting our, it's on your agenda to adopt the calendar for all your regular meetings next year, so.
That's next week's meeting?
Next week, Tuesday.
Okay, I won't be here for that.
Yep.
Okay.
Silence is good, I guess.
Also, the 15th, if it's looking heavy, and they wanted to do something, they would need it probably before the 1st then, would be 2 weeks before. If they wanted
Yeah, it
to.
sounds like you need to have a special meeting if we're gonna meet in January.
Yeah.
That's
I
what
was just gonna
that's
say.
where I was going with that.
Because if we want to keep this
Yeah, no,
moving forward.
that's why I brought it up. The 15th isn't looking like a realistic, unless we're gonna be here very late at night, so.
Yeah. So in general, let's say we need a special meeting, is it gonna run similar to this one where you give us 3 or 4 dates and then to Peter and then he puts them out to us and we try to figure out what will accommodate the most people?
We are much more flexible than you guys are, so we can make it work on our end.
Okay.
So we'll just have to pick a date, so something.
Well,
So if you guys think you'll have it ready that first week, then we'll start looking at meetings a couple weeks later.
Like, I'm really gonna try to get you guys next week.
Yeah.
But,
okay, good. Any other comments or thoughts?
Well, I think this is a good start.
Yeah.
I'm anxious to kind of see the meat of it.
Hmm.
All right,
Sounds good.
sounds good, guys, thank you.
Thank you. So just in terms of the rest of our agenda, since we do have a quorum now, but is there any other business?
Did we get their packets for Tuesday yet?
Back to mail that today.
Okay.
And
Okay,
I
so
will not be here next Tuesday.
watch your mail for packets for next Tuesday. Peter says they were mailed out today.
Correct. I'm trying to get somebody to put
And
WebEx
You'll still
or
be sending the
some
electronic
type
version
of
towards the
call-in
end of the
software.
week. All right. And then we do still have extended public comment, so if there's anybody who'd like to address the planning commission on any item,
Commission on
whether it was
Aging.
on tonight's agenda or not, you're welcome to do so at this time. We just ask you to give us your name and address for the minutes and limit your comments to 5 minutes. Extended public comment is open at 7:23.
And you do get to use the new podium.
Yes, you can stand at the podium. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that back up. Final board comment, any comments from board members?
I did want to let the board know, the location of next week's meeting has been moved due to the projected number of attendees possibly at our public hearing. We will be at the Commission on Aging, Room A.
You wanna miss that?
Like I said, I would be happy to call in for it.
I'll put you on FaceTime.
Okay.
Okay. Any other board comments? Okay, then we've completed our agenda. Remember to come to the Commission on Aging next week, and we stand in adjournment. Thanks, everybody.
You.